You type an address into your phone and a blue line appears, already knowing exactly where to turn. You trust it without thinking. You have never once wondered how your ancestors would have crossed an ocean with no map, no compass, and no glowing screen. But the real answer is far stranger than any app could ever be, because they didn't need a device. They became one. For most of human history, wayfinding wasn't a tool you carried. It was a skill built into your body, your memory, and the way you watched the sky. Your ancestors who first walked out of Africa, who crossed into Australia by boat some 65,000 years ago, who paddled across thousands of miles of open Pacific water long before Europe had ships that could survive a real storm, none of them used instruments. They used pattern. Think about what a compass actually does. It gives you one direction, magnetic north, and nothing else. Ancient navigators tracked dozens of signals at once, and they layered them into a system so precise it makes a single needle look almost primitive. How do you steer a canoe across 2,000 miles of empty ocean and still hit a speck of land the size of a parking lot? You start with the stars. Every star rises and sets at almost the same point on the horizon every single night. Once you memorize that, the whole sky becomes a fixed ring of markers you can steer by. Navigators across Oceania didn't look for single stars. They memorized star paths, whole sequences that rose one after another. So when one dipped below the horizon, the next was already climbing to take its place. The anthropologist David Lewis spent years sailing with traditional Pacific navigators in the 1960s and 70s, and he documented something remarkable in his research. These wayfinders could hold a bearing all night using nothing but memorized star sequences, switching from one guide star to the next without ever losing the line. No paper charts, no needle, just a mental map passed down from people who had never touched a magnet. But stars only work when the sky is clear. What happened on a cloudy night with no light to steer by at all? Your body became the backup instrument. Ocean swells move in consistent patterns, shaped by distant storms and the pull of land masses hundreds of miles away. And a trained navigator could lie down in the hull of a canoe and feel the rhythm of the water through their skin. Different swells crossing at different angles created a kind of texture beneath the boat. And once you learned to read it, you could hold a course through total darkness using nothing but your lower back. That sounds impossible until you remember your inner ear already does something similar every day, quietly tracking motion and orientation without you ever noticing it works at all. Wind mattered just as much. Trade winds blow with such predictable persistence across open ocean that a navigator could hold a bearing for days simply by keeping steady pressure of the wind against one cheek, adjusting only when the stars confirmed a shift was needed. Even the temperature of the air carried information, since wind drifting off distant land often held a faint trace of warmth or moisture that wind over open water never did. Birds mattered too. Certain seabirds fly out from land each morning to fish and return each evening, and their flight paths pointed straight back toward islands still invisible below the horizon. Clouds built up differently over land than over open water, creating a visible signature from dozens of miles away. Drifting leaves shifts in watercolor. Even the taste of the sea told a trained eye that land was close. None of this was guesswork. It was a layered system cross-checked constantly, not unlike the way your phone quietly checks GPS satellites against cell towers and Wi-Fi signals without you ever seeing the math underneath. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Almost none of this knowledge was ever written down. It lived in memory, passed from teacher to student across years of apprenticeship, often set to chant or song so it could survive being repeated thousands of times without drifting from the original. In Aboriginal Australia, entire trade routes and water sources spanning the continent were preserved in songlines, oral maps set to melody that let a person walk hundreds of miles through unfamiliar desert, guided only by a sequence passed down from their grandparents. The researcher Lynn Kelly has studied how oral systems like these functioned as extraordinarily precise memory technology, capable of holding more accurate geographic detail than most people assume any unwritten system could carry. Why trust a song over a drawing on paper? Because a song can't get soggy in a canoe and it never runs out of battery. This training never started in adulthood. Apprentice navigators often began as children, sitting for hours while an elder quizzed them on star sequences in total darkness, or lying them in the bottom of a canoe with their eyes closed and asking them to name the swell pattern moving beneath the hull. Getting it wrong meant doing it again the next night, and the next, sometimes for 10 years or more before a student was trusted to lead a voyage alone. It wasn't school in any sense you'd recognize. It was survival training disguised as patience. The clearest proof that none of this was myth or lucky drift came in 1976 when a double-hulled canoe called the Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional wayfinding, with no instruments allowed on board. The anthropologist Ben Finney helped organize the voyage specifically to test whether ancient Polynesian navigation could really work across open ocean, rather than being dismissed as accidental drift, which is what many earlier scholars had quietly assumed for decades. A master navigator named Mau Piailug, trained in one of the last unbroken chains of this tradition, steered more than 2,000 miles using only stars, swells, and memory, and arrived within sight of Tahiti almost exactly on target. It wasn't luck. It was a system refined enough to rival and, in some ways, outperform the instruments that eventually replaced it. So why does any of this matter to you scrolling through a map app that already knows the fastest route before you've even finished typing? Because the instinct never disappeared. It got outsourced. Your brain still contains a structure called the hippocampus, built specifically for spatial memory, the same neural machinery your ancestors trained for years to hold entire star paths and swell patterns in their heads. The neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire studied London taxi drivers who memorized thousands of streets without relying on GPS and found this exact brain region physically growing larger the more it was used. You still carry the hardware. You just stopped running the software. Think about how much of your own daily orientation has already been quietly handed off. You no longer check the sun's position to guess the time. You no longer glance at shadows or the angle of the light before deciding which way leads home. A tool answers those questions instantly now, so the part of your brain that once asked them simply stopped asking. Every time you let an app choose your route without glancing at a single street sign, a skill that once meant survival goes a little more quiet. Your ancestors didn't cross oceans because they had better tools than you. They crossed oceans because they never stopped paying attention. And somewhere underneath the blue dot glowing on your screen, that same attention is still waiting for you to use it.